Tonight on Primetime, tension again around the Strait of Hormuz. Washington accuses Iran of disrupting oil flows, while Tehran says restrictions remain under wartime conditions. The pressure is mounting ahead of critical weekend talks. So who really controls the Strait? Good evening. Tensions are rising again around the Strait of Hormuz, despite a fragile ceasefire. Well, Donald Trump is accusing Iran of disrupting oil flows, while Tehran insists restrictions remain in place under wartime conditions.
Also, a lot of people are affected by this.
US President Donald Trump has accused Iran of failing to uphold its commitments under a fragile ceasefire, saying Tehran is doing a very poor job of allowing oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. He also warned that oil would begin flowing again, with or without Iran's cooperation, and cautioned against any attempt to charge vessels for passage. Earlier, Iran insisted the strait remains open but subject to wartime conditions, requiring coordination with its military for safe passage.
Those technical restrictions are very much connected to the wartime condition, and it takes time to be removed. So safe passage is secured. Strait of Hormuz is open, but of course, each tankers and each vessel should make necessary arrangements with the Iranian authorities to be able to securely pass the strait.
At the same time, a statement attributed to Iran's leadership signaled a tougher approach, saying management of the Strait of Hormuz would enter a new phase, while also warning of retaliation and demands for compensation following the war. NATO has also weighed in, with allies discussing possible support to secure the route and ensure freedom of navigation.
Nearly without exception, allies are doing everything the United States is asking. They have heard and are responding to President Trump's requests. The United Kingdom is leading a coalition of countries that are aligning the military, the political and the economic tools that will be required to ensure free passage through the Strait of Hormuz.
Iran, meanwhile, has linked the continued restrictions to ongoing Israeli strikes on Lebanon, which it says violate the ceasefire and undermine diplomatic efforts. Despite the rising tensions, both sides are preparing for negotiations in Pakistan, where officials hope to stabilize the situation and prevent further disruption to global energy supplies.
The third party, in this case Pakistan, is no longer just simply passing messages. It's also trying to convince the other sides, or at least one side. And I think that it started out with the Americans asking the Pakistani government, particularly Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, and more importantly, Field Marshal Asim Munir, the Chief of Defense Forces.
Analysts say Pakistan's role has shifted from a go-between to an active mediator, with success potentially boosting its diplomatic standing, but failure risking further instability in the region.
Well, security has tightened in Islamabad, with army units deployed and access restricted ahead of these talks, as Washington and Tehran seek common ground with Lebanon, a key sticking point. Hira Mustafa reports now from Islamabad.
Extraordinary security arrangements are in place across Islamabad ahead of high-stakes talks between the United States and Iran. The capital's red zone area, that is home to government buildings and diplomatic missions, has been completely sealed off, with strict access controls, heavy deployment of security forces, and multiple checkpoints established at key entry points. Major roads are blocked with shipping containers, while traffic diversions remain in place across the city. Islamabad streets are largely deserted as authorities have declared a public holiday to enforce these security measures. A dedicated control center has also been set up at the Interior Ministry to monitor arrangements for the Iranian and American delegations. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance will lead the American delegation, the White House has said. It's not clear yet who will lead the Iranian delegation. Authorities are also keeping details such as the venue of the talks under wraps due to security reasons. though many believe the discussions could take place either at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or at a prominent hotel within the red zone. Analysts say the stakes are high for Islamabad as it attempts to bring both sides to the table while positioning itself as an interlocutor. The move has already drawn praise from several world leaders, increasing pressure on Pakistan to help deliver a meaningful outcome. But analysts warn that a major sticking point remains. Iran insists that any ceasefire must also include Lebanon. Pakistan says continued Israeli strikes they risk undermining the talks. A temporary ceasefire brokered earlier this week halted weeks of violence across parts of the region, but Israel and the US maintain that the ceasefire does not cover Lebanon. Analysts say if these key differences are not resolved, the possibility of a broader agreement stands on shaky ground. Hira Mustafa for A News, Islamabad.
Well, for more on this, we're joined in the studio now by our very own Katie Wilson, who's been closely following developments. Katie, great to have you back in the studio with us. We have the now famous map behind us. I think everybody in the world must be now so familiar with the Strait of Hormuz. Just give us the latest on what's happening.
Yes, so despite there being a ceasefire, the Strait of Hormuz, which we see here, is effectively still closed. This is very much a ceasefire in name only. Vessels in the area have received messages that they would be targeted and destroyed if they attempted to cross the strait without permission. According to marine traffic data, 18 vessels have now crossed the strait since Tuesday's ceasefire announcement. 4 on Wednesday, 10 on Thursday, and a further 4 on Friday.
Okay, so some traffic is getting through.
It is, but compare that to the 140 vessels that used to come through here every day. And that was prior to the outbreak of the conflict. And of those vessels, 4, including an oil tanker, are Iranian flagged. And further 3 have previously been sanctioned by the US for transporting Iranian oil. And among these is a Russian flagged tanker sanctioned by the US in July 2025. So those are the type of vehicles we're talking about here. President Trump has taken to Truth Social to say he's very upset that Iran hasn't been honouring the deal. So what we're seeing, and it's really clear from this map here, that Iran is exercising dominance over the Strait of Hormuz because it's got geography on its side. If we look, all of this top is covered by Iran. And yes, it's been battered militarily with hundreds, if not thousands, of missiles and drones destroyed. But now, Iran doesn't need its military in a sense, it just needs this coast. It's proposing a toll charge and wants its military to be able to check ships' cargo, which is of course unacceptable to the Gulf states that need to use this strait here. And it is impossible to keep the strait open by force. So, like I say, very much Iran is utilising that geographic position that it finds itself in. In terms of latest developments, peace talks are scheduled to take place in Pakistan, which we've just been hearing from our correspondent. That's between US and Iranian delegations. Islamabad's preparing for their arrival. The US Vice President has set off for Pakistan in Air Force 2, and he said, "We're looking forward to the negotiations," adding that the US is willing to extend the open hand if the Iranians act in good faith. However, he added that if they try to play the US, they won't be receptive to that. And apparently President Trump has given him guidelines for these upcoming discussions.
Okay, so all eyes then on Islamabad. Just talk us through the tensions that have been emerging in recent days that possibly could be casting a bit of a shadow over these talks.
Well, that's it. We've talked about a ceasefire, but really it's only frozen parts of this conflict. It hasn't actually resolved the underlying issues. So most of the bombing has stopped, but the ceasefire hasn't covered everything. And we don't actually have the details on what was agreed at the time and exactly how this is going to move to a long-term ceasefire and how that's going to be negotiated. A big sticking point is Lebanon, as fighting there has continued. The US and Israel have indicated that Lebanon doesn't form part of the agreement, whilst Pakistan, the key mediator in the talks here, say that it does. And today, a senior official in the Lebanese president's office told the BBC that they would only take part in their own set of negotiations with Israel if a ceasefire is implemented first. Now, just hours after that temporary ceasefire was announced, Israel conducted a massive aerial attack that killed at least 303 people in Lebanon and wounded over 1,000 others, according to Lebanon's health ministry. Iran said this was a blatant violation of the ceasefire deal and has asked the US to halt the Israeli aggression. That's their words. But Israel has said that that Lebanon, is its own separate issue. And in the past few hours, Kuwait has said it's come under attack from Iranian drones. So this isn't so much a breakdown of the ceasefire, but it's more of a reflection of its limits. This ceasefire is full of holes, and just remember the circumstances under which it was negotiated. Trump's unprecedented threat that a whole civilization will die. So I don't think it should really come as a surprise that this was a rushed ceasefire. It does have its limits here. And another key factor is mistrust. Neither side appears to believe that the other is going to fully stick to the spirit of the agreement. So what we're seeing is almost both sides testing the limits. We've got Iran through that controlled disruption through the Strait of Hormuz, and the US through that continued military presence in the region.
I mean, maybe this is relative success, Katie, compared to, as you say, how things were. Lack of trust between both sides. Maybe this is the best we can hope for at the moment. Just talk us through how both sides, Iran and the US, are framing the situation.
Yeah, so this is where it gets quite interesting, as they're both framing this in very different ways. President Trump is already speaking about the war in the past tense, a capital V military victory, as the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth put it. He's declared victory, so he needs an exit from this. Not only does he have a state visit from King Charles in the diary for later this month, and a summit with China's President Xi Jinping in May, but there's midterm elections in November. And with America's summer holiday season looming, Trump also needs these petrol prices to fall back to where they were before the war. A war is not what you want going into the midterm elections. J.D. Vance, as I mentioned, has warned against trying to play the US in upcoming talks. So we're seeing that fundamental mistrust is still there, and really both of these sides couldn't be further apart. Now, if we go back to how the Trump administration framed this at the beginning, I don't think they expected to spend early April sitting down for ceasefire talks. Trump was expecting a quick victory here. If we look at his rhetoric, basically an Iranian version of the kidnap of the Venezuelan leader, Nicolas Maduro, in January. So I think there was an expectation there that the killing of Iran's supreme leader in the first wave of airstrikes, that would lead to the collapse of the regime. But that has clearly been wildly misplaced. And we've not seen the new supreme leader since he was appointed. And there is speculation that he was badly hurt in that attack that killed his father, the former supreme leader. But with or without his participation, Iran's regime has demonstrated depths of resilience that has probably took the Trump administration by surprise. But Iran has its own reasons to end the war. It's still portraying itself as defiant, still able to launch missiles and drones. We're still seeing social media videos that they're publishing criticizing President Trump, but fundamentally Iran has suffered massive damage. Cities have come to an economic standstill, and the regime needs time to regroup and will try to use these talks in Pakistan to strengthen their position. So these Pakistani mediators who are going to be shuttling between these two delegations, they've got a really tough job on their hands, as the declared positions of the two sides couldn't be further apart. Yeah,
and as you say, there's that fundamental lack of trust too, a very difficult job for those mediators. And also, Katie, we heard from Mark Rutte in the report, international actors too getting in on the statements.
Exactly, yes. So Sir Keir Starmer, the UK's Prime Minister, he's just brought his 3-day trip to the Gulf to an end this afternoon. So on Wednesday, he met Saudi Arabian Crown Prince, and on Thursday travelled to the UAE, Bahrain and Qatar. And he said most of the discussions he had with senior officials concerned the practical plan on getting boats through the Strait of Hormuz. He said, "This conflict is going to define us for a generation, and we must respond, and we will respond with strength." So strong words there from Starmer. He said he discussed collective self-defense with leaders of the Gulf states. So that is how Starmer's framing it. We're generally seeing that echoed by European countries. And he accepted that the current ceasefire is fragile and said there can't be tolling or restrictions in the Strait of Hormuz as part of any long-term peace deal in the region. So as I mentioned, we're seeing that across European powers, that firm but balanced line. Publicly, they're stressing the need to protect freedom of navigation, particularly through the Strait of Hormuz, but they're also urging restraint on both sides. Obviously, we saw that reluctance to get involved militarily from Europe. But then you've got Asian countries and Asian economies like South Korea and Japan that are heavily dependent on energy flows through the Gulf. And their messaging has been very consistent: keep the strait open, stabilise the oil markets and avoid escalation. So at international level, organisations like the UN and maritime bodies, they've warned against any move that restricts shipping or imposes tolls. And they've stressed it risks undermining international law and setting dangerous precedents. So there's real pressure ahead of these talks as the outcome doesn't just affect the region, it directly impacts global energy markets, shipping and wider geopolitical stability.
Yeah, as you say, a lot of factors at play. What are the key indicators, Katie, that you think people should be watching out for as we now approach these talks?
So what we know so far about these talks coming up, Trump does have a 15-point plan. It's not been published, but there have been leaked versions, and that makes it sound more like a surrender document than a basis for negotiation. Iran has a 10-point plan, but that contains a list of demands that the US has consistently rejected in the past. So creating a more durable ceasefire will require some kind of agreement to at least keep talking about these two sides' contradictory peace plans, contradictory lists, and without that mutual trust, which we've talked about, the fundamental distrust, even a form of words that's going to keep the talks going, going to keep the ceasefire going, that is positive, whether or not there's an agreement on those wider issues. I think the concern would be no agreement at all, because that would point towards going back to war. The newest and most urgent problem they face is, of course, reopening the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow exit from the Gulf, and keeping it closed gives Iran a chokehold on the world's economy. In reopening that waterway that was used by hundreds of ships a day before the war broke out, that has become the central issue in this negotiation. So there's millions of civilians in the Middle East who've been caught up in this conflict, and they want that negotiation to be the war's end game. But doing a deal on this strait, I think, is going to be every bit as difficult as discussing Iran's nuclear capabilities. Iran's nuclear program was intended to produce more options to deter enemies. That's what their leadership would say. But actually, it turns out, as the Iranians are finding out, closing the Strait of Hormuz is a more cheaper, potentially devastating to the economy of neighbours and enemies. And actually, that's a lot easier to implement. So obviously, during this two-week ceasefire already agreed, we're already seeing Iran insisting that any ship that wants to transit through the Strait of Hormuz, they'll need positions of Iran's armed forces, or it'll be attacked and destroyed. So this could potentially be a long-term strategy for Iran. It has geography on its side, and they've seen the impact that this can have. So if we look ahead to the talks themselves, there's no official confirmations that any of the delegations have arrived yet. We know JD Vance is on his way, and there's also been no official schedule announced by Pakistan, but the White House had said that the talks would take place tomorrow morning. So we'll be watching and waiting for that, and all eyes will be on the talks potentially tomorrow.
They certainly will. Katie, thank you as always for your analysis. Thank you. Okay, the positions around the Strait of Hormuz. What is driving the situation? Well, we're going to be looking at Israel now. Israel is ramping up its campaign in Lebanon, making it clear that there's no immediate path to a ceasefire. At the same time, a diplomatic track is quietly taking shape, though major obstacles remain.
Israel is escalating its military campaign in Lebanon and making one thing clear: there will be no ceasefire. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Thursday that Israeli forces will continue striking Hezbollah targets until security is fully restored in the north. His statement comes just hours after a massive wave of airstrikes across Lebanon, with around 100 targets hit in a matter of minutes. Lebanese officials report more than 300 people killed and over 1,000 wounded in the latest attacks.
Following repeated appeals from the Lebanese government to enter into peace negotiations with us, last night I instructed the cabinet to open direct negotiations with Lebanon in order to achieve two goals. One, the disarmament of Hezbollah. Two, a historic sustainable peace agreement between Israel and Lebanon.
But there is a major obstacle. Hezbollah has already rejected direct talks and clashes are continuing on the ground. The crisis is also spreading beyond the region. The United States and Israel say a wider ceasefire deal does not include Lebanon, while Iran insists it does, raising the risk of broader escalation. A conflict intensifying on the battlefield and a fragile path to diplomacy just beginning. Since early March, nearly 1,900 people have been killed and more than 6,000 injured, according to Lebanese officials. At the same time, a diplomatic track is emerging. Netanyahu says Israel is ready to begin direct negotiations with Lebanon, with talks expected in Washington next week. The goal is to disarm Hezbollah and move toward what he calls a historic and lasting peace.
Well, to get more insight on this rapidly escalating situation, we're joined now by Mohammed Ali Zafar, research scholar at the University of Oxford, who's been closely following developments in Lebanon. Mohammed, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Great to have you here with us on Primetime. We can see the impact of what's happened, but I'd like to start by talking about the strategy, what we know about Israel's objectives with these intensified strikes.
Right. Thank you so much for having me on your show. So if we look into some recent statements coming out of Israel at the moment, if we see that like yesterday, the finance minister of Israel said that there will be a final political leg to the military actions of the war. Now, in a deeper assessment, what he meant was that the expansion designs of Israel includes part of Israel, Syria, Lebanon, and the West Bank and Gaza. So these statements coming out from the finance minister Smotrich shows that Israel has bigger plans for what is going to happen in the Middle East. So from that perspective, it is important for us to understand that this conflict will continue, irrespective of the discussions that the Netanyahu is saying that he wants to have a discussion with Lebanon, saying that the Lebanese leadership is basically saying that they really want to have negotiations with Israel. This shows as if he is not willing to, put Israeli pressure off the table from the ongoing discussion that will be held from tomorrow morning onwards in Islamabad between Iran and the US. So from that perspective, Israel wants to stay relevant. At the same time, keep on pressurizing Iran that if it is not able to find a solution with the discussion with the US that sort of aligns with Israeli objectives, it will keep on pushing its objectives in Lebanon. That's the biggest challenge for Iranian proxies in the Middle East. So I think from that point of view, this will be a pressing concern.
Yeah, and how realistic do you think the prospect of these direct talks actually happening is, given Hezbollah's position?
Well, considering what has happened with Hezbollah, it seems less likely that there will be a real talk happening. But I think it's just another front being opened, because if we look into the statements that were coming when the ceasefire was announced, even the Prime Minister of Pakistan, when he announced the ceasefire, he said that the ceasefire includes what is happening in Lebanon as well. But still, Israel continued with the aggression. That shows as if in the backdoor channels, there was some sort of understanding that there will be a strategic pause across Middle East. But it seems as if the US and Israel has different viewpoint, and they did not believe, as JD said as well, that Iran misunderstood the whole idea of strategic pause at the moment, and it did not include Lebanon. So from that perspective, if we look a bit deeper into what is happening, it shows as if there is less likely chance that peace will prevail in Lebanon for now. But if talks in Islamabad turn to be a success, and both sides are, willing to sign some document showing that, okay, we will continue to negotiate with each other, then maybe in the broader perspective, we will see peace emerging in Lebanon as well. So there is a lot of entanglement between different, states and their peace aligned with what is going to happen in Islamabad.
Yeah, it's very interesting. As you say, this disagreement over the extent to which Lebanon is included in the ceasefire seems to be catching a lot of attention. Different viewpoints, as you say, perhaps some misunderstandings. Where are we at this point now when it comes to that singular issue?
Right. So I think from my understanding and from a political risk point of view, I'm hopeful that since diplomacy has regained gravity in Middle East, It's a positive development that at least both states are willing to talk, especially Iran and the US are willing to talk. But saying that I'm extremely hopeful about the prospect, that will be a difficult thing to say at the moment, because if you look into the points being raised by the US and by Iran in terms of the 15 points plan proposed by the US, and then the 10 points plan proposed by Iran in the counter, although in media there isn't like exact details about what it is included, but some speculation says that there will be broader discussions about US bases in Middle East, about the future of Strait of Hormuz, at the same time Iranian ballistic missile program to be brought into discussion. Now these two aspects, especially US bases in Middle East and Iranian ballistic missile programs, from both sides, if we look deeper, both sides are not willing to have discussions about these two aspects. They're willing to talk about nuclear technology and the nuclear enrichment designs, and the more access that Iran would be willing to provide to the international bodies in terms of investigation into the nuclear enrichment topic. But from a military point of view, Iran does not want to have a discussion about the ballistic missile program. And similarly, there will be more discussions about these aspects. But from my understanding, I believe what is right is that both states have showed willingness to talk to each other, but it is only time that will tell that will they lead to a comprehensive peace for the Middle East. But for now, we should remain hopeful.
Remain hopeful. Many actors in the region, I think, are sort of quietly reassured about what's been happening, but also equally concerned that this escalation, this spiralling into other neighbouring countries might come back again. How do you feel about that? Do you feel reassured at this moment? Have things escalated as far as they could, or is there a risk that actually troubles involving other countries could come back again?
Well, I think when the negotiations are going to happen in Islamabad, if it does not lead to a solution, or maybe if there is a strike on Iran, probably that is something which, why I'm saying this is because there were negotiations happening in Oman as well, and it was believed, and even the Oman's foreign minister said that we were really close to having a deal with Iran, and even he stated that there was discussion that Iran would have no uranium enrichment, facility, and these are like broader things, even going beyond what US was expecting from Iran as well. So if we look into what happened in past, I believe that if there is no irritant in terms of any strike on Iran, or any if the Lebanese what is happening in Lebanon does not lead to some sort of strategic pause, especially in this time period when the two important powers are holding talk in Islamabad, then I believe that this could escalate as well. But Pakistan has been acting really cautiously, working with Azerbaijan, Turkey, China, UAE, and other Middle Eastern powers, and those who have major stakes, to make sure that they understand that this process that is being started in Islamabad is given its utmost attention, and both sides are able to find the solutions. But it is only time that will tell that will they be able to find peace, because the discussions that they're going to have will be really difficult, and the bargaining situation shows that both sides haven't achieved that much upper hand against each other that they will be willing to compensate the other party. But it really depends on what is going to be discussed.
Mr. Zafar from Oxford University, we thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories shaping the day with Andy Mioch. Don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime now. Andy Mioch has joined us to bring us the top business news stories of the day. Andy, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, global markets are reacting to all the latest developments out of the Middle East. There's some consumer prices reports and some news on fuel strikes and aviation strikes. So let's see what we've got. First up, European and Asian markets were on the rise following a signal that Israel and Lebanon might open talks to end hostilities. Ahead of the Pakistan peace talks between the United States and Iran, oil prices were up as shipping flows around the Strait of Hormuz remained severely restricted.
stocks advanced on Friday, with European markets on track for their third straight weekly gain, and Asian peers notching their best week in more than 3 years. This comes after Israel said on Thursday it had sought talks with Lebanon, raising hopes for a break in Middle East hostilities and a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has cited Israel's continuing attacks on Lebanon as a key sticking point in its ceasefire agreement with the US, which requires Iran to reopen the strait, through which a fifth of global energy supplies typically pass. Delegations from Tehran and Washington are set to hold talks in Pakistan on Saturday. The pan-European index StoxX rose 0.6%, with healthcare and technology stocks leading the way, rising 1.3% and 0.8% respectively. Wall Street futures were mostly flat after reversing earlier losses. On Thursday, the S&P 500 rose 0.6%, its seventh straight day of gains. MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan added 0.9% to put it up 7.3% for the week, its biggest advance since November 2022. Still, oil markets remained jittery, creeping up from this week's one-month lows. Brent crude rose 1% to $96.9 a barrel, though it was still on course for a fall of around 11% this week. The Strait of Hormuz remains largely closed to shipping, with marine traffic at well below 10% of normal volumes on Thursday, as Tehran asserted its control of the strategic waterway. In a social media post, US President Donald Trump warned Tehran not to charge tolls on ships crossing the Strait of Hormuz, saying Iran was doing a very poor job of allowing oil to pass through the strait.
As the Iran war sent energy costs soaring, U.S. consumer prices spiked in March and took the Federal Reserve further from its inflation target. That's according to a fresh report by the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
U.S. consumer prices increased by the most in nearly 4 years in March as the war with Iran boosted oil prices and the pass-through from tariffs persisted, further diminishing chances for an interest rate cut this year. The Consumer Price Index jumped 0.9% last month, the Labor Department's Bureau of Labor Statistics said on Friday. It is the largest increase since June 2022, when prices soared in response to the Russia-Ukraine war. Consumer prices rose 0.3% in February. In the 12 months through March, the CPI advanced 3.3% after rising 2.4% in February. The jump in consumer inflation followed in the wake of a sharp rebound in job growth last month, which suggested the labour market remained stable. There are, however, concerns that a prolonged conflict in the Middle East could undercut the labour market, especially if households respond to high prices by pulling back spending.
Over in Ireland, protests over high fuel prices entered a fourth day, sparking concerns about fuel shortages and emergency services as demonstrators clogged roads and blocked access to refining and distribution sites around the country. The organizers have said they will call off the protests if the government agrees to talk with them.
Protests around fuel prices in Ireland entered their fourth day, with 3 of the country's main refineries and terminals blockaded and traffic in Dublin at a standstill. The demonstrations have been primarily instigated by farmers, agricultural contractors and road haulage operators who are upset with the government's response to the spike in fuel prices since the onset of the Iran war. However, recognised industry bodies, including the Irish Farmers Association and the Irish Road Haulage Association, are not involved. The standoff in Ireland has seen petrol pumps in forecourts across the country run dry, with demonstrators claiming they will remain in place until they secure a meeting with the government to air their grievances over what they claim is a lack of support from authorities. The government has asked the country's army to be on standby to remove blockades at terminals and refineries, describing the protests as an act of national sabotage.
In semiconductor industry news, TSMC, the world's largest contract chip maker, reported a 35% surge in first quarter revenue, beating market forecasts. The chip giant is benefiting from sustained demand from its key customers like Apple and Nvidia.
The world's largest contract chip maker, TSMC saw first quarter revenue surge 35% thanks to the AI boom. Revenue from January to March hit $35.7 billion, beating market forecasts on surging interest in artificial intelligence applications. Friday's results are in line with TSMC's January guidance of up to $35.8 billion on its last earnings call. The tech titan will report full first quarter earnings on April 16th, including an updated current quarter and full year outlook. The company has been a major beneficiary of advances in AI. That boom has more than offset a tapering off in pandemic-led demand for chips used in consumer electronics like tablets. TSMC's customers include Nvidia and Apple. Its shares closed up more than 2% on Friday.
Hundreds of flights have been cancelled as Lufthansa cabin crew members began their one-day strike. The disruptions center on flights leaving major hubs, Frankfurt and Munich. This is Lufthansa's third major strike this year.
Lufthansa flights were significantly disrupted on Friday as cabin crew union UFO staged a one-day strike, the airline's third work stoppage in 2 months, impacting operations at its Frankfurt and Munich hubs. The strike, running from 12:01 a.m. to 10 p.m. local time, affected all Lufthansa departures from major hubs, while CityLine cabin crew participated at 9 other German airports. Tens of thousands of passengers will be impacted by cancellations and delays, according to airport operator Fraport. UFO stated the industrial action stems from unresolved talks over working conditions for 19,000 cabin crew and redundancy terms for around 800 staff at CityLine, the Lufthansa feeder airline that is winding down operations. Fraport, the operator of Frankfurt Airport, reported about 580 flights were cancelled, affecting roughly 72,000 passengers out of 1,350 scheduled flights and 155,000 passengers expected for the day. The figures, Fraport noted, cover all airlines operating at the airport, not just Lufthansa, and may evolve as the day progresses. Lufthansa Airlines' brand CEO Jens Ritter criticised the strike as completely disproportionate. Earlier strikes by Lufthansa cabin crew and pilots in February and March resulted in widespread cancellations amid ongoing labour disputes at Germany's flagship carrier.
And finally, the Champions League ball is due for a redesign as Nike entered exclusive talks with UEFA to become the official match ball provider for the 2027 to 2031 cycle of the competition. The U.S. sportswear group has beaten off competition from incumbent supplier Adidas and fellow challenger Puma.
Nike is in exclusive talks to sponsor footballs for European men's matches, edging out rival Adidas, a move that could provide a visibility boost to the American sportswear giant. UC3, the joint venture between the Union of European Football Associations and European football clubs, said on Thursday it was negotiating with Nike to become the official ball provider from 2027 to 2031, a role that was rival Adidas for 25 years. UEFA is the main governing body for European football, while EFC represents the clubs themselves. A Nike spokesperson confirmed the talks but declined to give details, while Adidas said in a statement it would not renew its contract. The Financial Times reported, citing a person familiar with the matter, that the value of the deal across competitions could roughly double to more than €40 million a year. The potential deal precedes June's FIFA World Cup, also seen as a key marketing opportunity for Nike.
And that is all we had for you in the business brief for tonight. Back to you guys.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, oil markets on edge as tensions around a fragile US-Iran ceasefire drive uncertainty. So what's next for prices? Stay with us. A warm welcome back to Primetime, wherever you're watching. Oil markets are in focus again as tensions rise around a fragile ceasefire between the United States and Iran. With key talks approaching this weekend, uncertainty is already feeding into prices.
The global oil market has become the clearest signal of investor anxiety. swinging sharply on every development tied to the ceasefire and regional stability. Earlier optimism briefly pushed prices lower, with Brent crude falling more than 11% after the initial ceasefire announcement, slipping back below $100 a barrel after a recent surge. But that relief has been short-lived, with prices gradually recovering as doubts grow over whether the agreement can hold. At the center of concern remains the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point handling around a fifth of global oil flows. Tensions are being compounded by reports of damage to key Saudi infrastructure, including pipeline and production facilities, further tightening supply and deepening concerns over global energy flows.
Of course, continuing to watch developments in the Strait of Hormuz with nervous anticipation, Donald Trump has accordingly criticized Iran for a very poor job. It is speculated that tariffs will be imposed on individual ships, or that passage will ultimately depend on the individual countries of the ships. As such, investors are continuing to watch the Strait of Hormuz, which is a key factor for the oil price.
Even as European energy stocks slipped 0.7%, oil prices continue to act as the market's pressure gauge, with traders weighing both diplomatic signals and physical supply risks. The result is a market caught between brief optimism and persistent uncertainty, with inflation fears and energy security once again driving sentiment. For now, oil remains the world's most sensitive barometer, reacting not just to diplomacy, but to disruption across one of the globe's most vital supply routes. And as weekend talks approach, markets are bracing for yet another swing.
Okay, to break down what's driving this volatility in oil markets, we're joined now by Jorge Costa Oliveira, political analyst coming to us from Lisbon in Portugal. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Jorge, on Primetime tonight. We saw in the clip there quite a few nervous traders, twitchy analysts, a lot of volatility around. But from your perspective, how have markets over the last few days been reacting to political developments?
We all have seen that there is and there has been, and there will continue to be most likely some volatility that arises from the uncertainty of the current situation on the war or the truth in the Strait of Hormuz. I don't think that the futures markets should make us very optimistic. They also reflect a premium on the short term arising from that geopolitical instability. And I don't think that that is going to go away. I think we are going to have to live with that, not only for a few weeks, but probably for several months. There is that component, which is probably the most important component currently, which is the uncertainty regarding the geopolitical situation. We have still the problem of the overall supply. It is not likely that supply will be able to match demand anytime soon. And the fact that very few tankers have been allowed to cross the Strait of Hormuz doesn't bode very well for the prices in the coming weeks, at the very least. Furthermore, I mean, so far the reserves of the International Energy Agency have been used. They are, I think, around 400 million barrels, but that will be useful for a few months, and the market knows that. So if we do not reestablish some normalcy in terms of the crossing of the Strait of Hormuz, I think we are going to start to see, especially the Asian markets that are in dire need of energy, especially in oil and gas. Just consider the Indian market, where definitely there is there's a great demand for very short-term supply of gas. If that does not happen, we are going to start to see a war in order to get supply contracts, and starting with spots. So I'm not very optimistic on the evolution of prices in the midst of all this volatility. I think the trend arising from this imbalance between supply and demand shows us that most likely we should expect a trend in the upward direction.
Yeah, and of course, oil being used as a sort of proxy for general investor confidence, understandably because of its enormous importance, but also other commodities too, George. You know, we were talking on the show last night about helium, about fertilizer products. There's a whole range of really critical commodities that at the moment are having huge difficulty getting to their destination.
Yes, well, helium is dramatic because helium is unreplaceable, and it is really necessary for a bunch of things. And if you just think about the American economy, where the growth of the GDP last year, or at least in the last quarter of last year, was basically the outcome or the result of the growth of the artificial intelligence sector. Artificial intelligence and data centers and several of their components, namely advanced microchips, cannot be made without helium. So the shortage on helium is definitely going to be devastating, and I don't think that, although even Christine Lagarde has mentioned that and a few other relevant analysts have mentioned that, I don't think that, and the market has yet factored that with the relevance that it has. As regards the fertilizers and fertilizers components, the situation is also not brilliant. I'm still not happy with the information we have on the bombing on the SABIC complex, but SABIC produced a significant portion of what the fertilizers market needs. So we really are going to have great problems for sure in these two components of the chain of value of several products. And then there are still a few more that usually do not appear, but which are components and chemicals that usually used to be in which chain of value the Gulf countries were a component of. And once that is factored in, I don't think that is going to be good for the financial markets and for a positive outcome in the short term of the economic evolution of some of the most developed or main economic blocks in the world, because it's not only developed. India is also going to be significantly affected.
And George, as you rightly say, the Strait of Hormuz is so critical that impossible to escape any global economic damage from what's happened. But nevertheless, are there any alternatives, any supply chain alternatives, infrastructure options that could be looked at to try and mitigate this restriction of flow if this situation were to continue into the medium term?
No, I mean, there are two alternatives that have been mentioned, and I think it's the only ones. One is the East-West pipeline that the Saudis have. Even so, if you consider the problems that we may have in the Bab al-Mandab Strait, it's not sure that it can be completely used, at least for the Asian markets. And then we have another corridor from the Emirates to, I think, to Oman. But in both cases, the numbers I have seen show that we can expect to have, if it works at full capacity, as it has been the case in the last days, at least until the recent bombing by Iran of one of the segments of the East-West pipeline, it has a capacity of 3.5 to combined capacity of 3.5 to 5.5 million barrels a day, whilst the Strait of Hormuz had been seen 20 plus million barrels per day. So the imbalance is quite clear, and therefore this will mitigate a little bit the supply issue, but it definitely will not solve the problem in the overall, because obviously, I mean, it's from 5 to 20, it's not difficult to realize that there's going to be a problem.
No, yeah, quite right. And you mentioned there the bombing of infrastructure. Obviously, part of unlocking this situation is political agreement. But has presumably the bombing of infrastructure sites by both sides has also compounded this problem.
Yes, and let's hope it doesn't go further, because in the beginning there was a clear intention not to touch at least the energy infrastructure, and the Israelis have made this more difficult, and retaliations from Iran on the neighboring countries also complicate issues. Let's hope it doesn't go further. If it goes further, both on the energy petrochemical complexes, refineries, or even on life-sustaining basic mechanisms like the desalinization plants, we are going to have a very, very big problem that will have medium-term consequences, not only short-term consequences. And many of those medium-term consequences, the market has not yet factored them in. They have not yet been completely ascertained, and the analysts feel uneasy to include them because it's not certain that they're going to happen. But even if we give it a 25% chance of happening, that is going to bring about relevant premium on the prices of oil and gas.
And then finally, George, what is it that you think analysts, traders, people in the financial sector are going to be looking for in terms of indicators as we head into these talks?
Well, first, they're going to try to find indicators that will help reduce the uncertainty arising from the geopolitical volatility. And the American leadership, to be honest, does not help in that regard. And the current situation where large bets are made before political announcements also does not bode well for the credibility of the way in which things are being managed. But that is going to be the first component. The second, they're going to look very, very carefully to the situation on the ground and to the bombing of infrastructures and the capability of alternative supply to reach the market in the short term. So it will depend on how they will read what currently has been stated. But I don't think that overall demand is going to be able to decrease during this year. And therefore, I'm not very optimistic because I don't think supply will be able to cope or alternative supply or additional supply to try to compensate for the shortage of the oil and gas that is not coming from the Gulf. I don't think it's going to be able to cope with that gap. So things are going to be complicated in the coming months or during the remaining of the year.
Indeed, indeed. George, it's been fascinating to get your analysis. We thank you very much indeed for joining us on the show.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, a temporary Easter ceasefire in Ukraine, but reports of continued fighting raise questions over whether it will hold. Stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. Vladimir Putin has announced a temporary ceasefire in Ukraine to mark Orthodox Easter, but the situation on the ground remains uncertain. Well, both sides are signalling restraint, even as reports of continued fighting emerge.
Now, an urgent message from the Kremlin. By decision of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, a ceasefire is declared from 4 p.m. on April 11th until the end of the day on April 12th.
Russia has announced a temporary ceasefire in Ukraine to mark Orthodox Easter, a 32-hour pause in fighting set to last from Saturday evening until Sunday midnight. The Kremlin says all military operations will be halted across the front, while troops remain on alert to respond to any violations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Kyiv will respect the ceasefire. In a post on social media, he said Ukraine had repeatedly called for a pause in fighting during Easter and is ready for reciprocal steps. Zelensky also stressed that civilians deserve a holiday without threats and urged Russia not to resume attacks after Easter. Despite the announcement, fighting has continued in several regions. Ukrainian authorities report multiple attacks in Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia, regions with casualties, damaged homes and fires following shelling. On the diplomatic front, contacts between Moscow and Washington are continuing but largely behind closed doors. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says discussions are taking place informally and confidentially, with no clear timeline for renewed formal peace talks. Meanwhile, both sides have carried out another exchange of war dead. According to Russian sources, Moscow returned the bodies of around 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers while receiving 41 Russian servicemen in return.
Residents in Ukraine and Russia have been reacting to the announcement with mixed feelings about whether or not the ceasefire will hold.
Ukrainians have voiced skepticism over Russian President Vladimir Putin's announcement of a 32-hour ceasefire for Orthodox Easter, saying previous truces have repeatedly been violated.
Honestly, I don't believe it at all. I mean, how long has this full-scale war been going on now? And every year it's the same old ceasefire, ceasefire. Even on one of the New Year's Eve, when they promised a ceasefire, there was an air raid alarm all night long. Well, of course I want to believe it, but no, I don't think it's going to happen.
How can you trust a man who destroyed his own people, attacked Ukraine, and is basically the #1 terrorist? How can you trust him? He lies.
Meanwhile, reactions in Russia were more cautious, with some expressing hope the ceasefire might hold despite uncertainty.
So they agreed to a ceasefire? Well, let's put it this way. God willing, that's how it will be. But so far, there's no real sense that the things will improve anytime soon.
I think I can only wish and hope that our leadership, the leadership of the other country and of all other countries, will try to do everything possible so that we finally get through this difficult stage and choose a much better life. That's it.
Putin's announcement was similar to a 30-hour ceasefire he ordered last year. Each side accused the other of violating it. The Kremlin said the Easter ceasefire would be in effect from Saturday at 4 p.m. to midnight on Sunday evening.
Well, to discuss this, we're joined now by Victor Bruno, geopolitical analyst, who's joining us from Brazil. Victor, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime tonight. What's the latest then on the ground, as you understand it? Is this ceasefire actually being observed?
Well, thanks for having me, Guy. It's a pleasure. Yeah, this situation is very, very difficult to discern because this war, in short, it has no end that is desirable for either of the countries. Russia joined in, attacked Ukraine, thinking that this would be a very quick operation. And war is a darn beast because it quickly derails as it derailed. So there are 4 years into the war, and there is no end in sight. And for the Ukrainians, the death toll is just very, very high. Approximately 500,000 people are now dead. And you have problems of conscription, forced conscription. And so this war, in short, it's very, talking about peace in this war is just very difficult. So in my opinion, we should not hold our breaths and hope that this ceasefire will actually be observed. The variables are infinite in this war.
Yes, indeed, Victor. And it's also, I mean, it's a very short period of time that we're talking about. I mean, nevertheless, how is each side framing this? So is there a sense in which both Russia and Ukraine are at least from a sort of political point of view, looking like they're going to commit to this ceasefire?
No, because I think it doesn't fit, it doesn't suit very well either of the sides. This war has involved an inordinate amount of backstabbing from both parties. To give you an example, the Druzhba pipeline is continuously victim of attacks from the Ukrainian side. And the war, as I said, has cost Russia, from the Russian point of view, a lot. So the more Moscow can bleed Kiev dry, the better for them. So, and there's another thing that actually suits to talk both about the war in Ukraine as well as Iran. Ceasefires are things that take time, and from the literature on ceasefire, you need at least 2 weeks to see if something will hold, if a ceasefire will hold. And we are talking about a very short period of time. It's barely time to rinse and repeat, by which I mean design new strategies, try to negotiate a settlement, especially a settlement that is as contentious as the settlement to hypothetically end this war. So I don't think that until Easter, the other Orthodox Easter, we'll see actually any ceasefire, any diminishment in hostilities.
Victor, some analysts have been talking today about the power in Russian society of the Orthodox Christian leadership. I mean, what do you think is driving Putin here? Is he making overtures to that community? Is it just an excuse that he's looking? What's in his mind, do you think?
Well, I think Putin is a very clever leader, and he never underestimated, and I think he made actually very good use, by good I mean political use, of the Christian base in Russia. And in fact, if you think about his path to power from the late 90s to now, it walks hand in hand with religion, with Christianity. You have to remember that when he took power, he took over, Russia was in a virtual state of civil war. From a moral point of view, it had just walked out from 80 years of communism. For instance, abortion, which I know is a very contentious theme, but just to drive home about morality and religion, was in an all-time high. Now, abortion, I believe the correct number is about 500,000 per year, which is approximately the same number of abortions per year in the United States. And the Orthodox Church, it had a lot of say, a lot of importance in this process of in Russia to order. So yes, I think he's waving the olive branch, and he's trying to play the role of the good Christian leader, of the good civilizational leader, because as he always insists when he talks about this war, it has a lot to do with Russian and Christian Russian history. He's thinking about the Kiev Rus, as he made clear time and time again. So yes, I think he's trying to play the good Christian civilizational leader role in trying to wave this olive branch and using Orthodox Easter as a means to try to mitigate some of the pain that this conflict is causing.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting indeed. We've heard, of course, reports of the continuation of fighting. What do you make of those reports, and what do you think it tells us about the situation at the moment?
Well, I think that, as I said, you should not underestimate the reality. Am I breaking up?
No.
You should not. Okay. you should not underestimate the reality, the fury and the hatred that's at play here. This is, among many other things, Guy, a ethnic conflict, because you are talking about Russian Ukrainians and other ethnicities.
Oh, well, unfortunately, we are actually having one or two technical issues there with our guest. We'll just wait 1 second, see if we can get the guest back. Okay, no, sadly not. Well, thank you, Victor Bruno there, geopolitical analyst from Brazil, for his analysis. Now, after the break, Algeria prepares to welcome Pope Leo XIV in a visit seen as a powerful symbol of interfaith dialogue. Stay with us. Welcome out. You're watching Primetime. Algeria is preparing to welcome Pope Leo XIV in a visit seen as symbolically significant. Well, expectations are building ahead of what is being framed as a moment of interfaith engagement.
Residents of Algiers expressed their optimism about the upcoming historical visit by Pope Leo XIV, who is expected to meet members of Algeria's Christian community during a 3-day trip to the country.
I think that the Pope's upcoming visit is a very good thing, not only for Algeria, but for all nations, because it encourages friendly and fraternal communication between different religions. The visit of the Pope to Algiers is a positive step to show the whole world that in this country there are no conflicts between religions. It highlights that there is freedom and democracy in the practice of religion, that all religions are respected, and that everyone is free to practice their faith without imposing it on others.
The city is ramping up preparations ahead of the Pope's visit, with work already well underway. Municipal crews are repainting walls and polishing statues across key areas. At the Basilica of Our Lady of Africa in Algiers, workers have been seen refreshing the exterior and surrounding grounds in anticipation of the visit.
A man who will once again encourage us in our faith and in our mission to build a new world, a world where there is peace and where people live together in harmony. And here, at the heart of the Basilica, I find myself at the very heart of that shared life and fellowship, where there is no distinction and everyone lives in perfect unity.
According to the official Vatican News website, this will be the third journey of Pope Leo outside Italy since the beginning of his pontificate, and he will be travelling to Algeria, Cameroon, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea.
Well, to discuss this, we're joined now by our guest, Enrique Cosero, political analyst from Madrid in Spain. Thank you very much, Enrique, for joining us on Primetime tonight. Just give us your sense, if you will, of the preparations that are underway in Algiers now ahead of this very famous visit.
First and foremost, we have to talk about what this Pope is doing differently than the former Pope Francis. And right now, the signals and all the evidences that Pope Leo is given is probably being more towards the approaching not just another religions, but also what was a very first worry on the first days of his papacy, which is ecumenism, which means approaching to other Christian faiths around the world. And I think this travel, this visit to Algeria is quite significant event for the both of these things, the approaching to other faiths as Islam and ecumenism, because there is I can say an important Christian community in the country, but by any means, the Christianity is in the country. So he has to do this. He believes in ecumenism. He has been preaching in the togetherness and the join of the faiths, and it's especially symbolic in a troubling time like the one we're living.
And are there signs when you look at the reactions that other Christian groups in the country have had, the residents that we've seen one or two vox pops in our reports? Do you think there are signs that message of commonality, community is really cutting through?
I think for Algeria, this is going to be such an event. And for the Christian community, it's not only the Catholics ones are going to be something that they've never seen before. So the importance of the sign, the importance of the trouble is quite huge. But the other part, the approaching to the other faiths, is gonna, I think, is gonna be stronger as much the Pope Leo evolves his papacy. The more Pope Leo develop his papacy and his doctrine about what the Catholic religion has to be to the world, he is, I think, and I believe, he is aware that the Catholicism is retreating in Europe, is retreating in the United States and Canada. It's not the main. Could be culturally, but probably it's not the main faith that the new countries are getting into. But in South Korea, because South Korea has experienced a huge increase of the Catholic faith, but on the other hand, Catholicism is not what it used to be. It was a huge religion with a lot of people following it, believing and sharing the faith. And right now, probably in South America's evangelism and in other countries, different, more spiritual, less religious faiths and any branch of the Protestantism are taking advantage, if you want to say that. So yes, this demonstration, this showing of openness to other faiths and to the ecumenism is going to be a huge signal that I think Pope Leo is gonna develop a long time.
Yeah, it also sounds like a strategic decision on behalf of the Vatican, from what you're describing, Enrique, that to some degree to be where the growth is, where the interest is at the moment. I mean, to what extent is the Vatican strategic when it looks at where to go and how to plan these trips?
I think we're watching a joint effort between the Secretary of State Cardinal Parolin, and the very own Pope Leo, in order to take whatever Pope John Paul II did, who was a huge traveler, and no country was almost no country was kept untouched by his feet. So this means that if you want to say it in a religious term, pilgrimage, and knowing other cultures and going to meet another faiths and going to join to any other Catholic community far beyond the Vatican, I think is sorry for using this word, but I can't find a better word. A very good example of propagandism. And it's not said in a bad way. It's said in the good way. In fact, I think there is one of the branches of the Catholic Church, one of the orders, is called propagandism. So it's not said with a pejorative sense of the word. So this is I think we are facing a new pope who's taking, I think, the best of John Paul II.
Very interesting indeed. I mean, what is the central message then that the Vatican's sending out with this visit? Is it, as you said, at the top of the conversation to do with coming together across different denominations. What is that key message they're hoping to land with this visit?
I think one of the main messages here is we're before a pope that doesn't fear the world, doesn't fear the unknown, for saying it's not unknown, but for putting it in a mystic way, the unknown, whatever beyond the walls of the Vatican but for many other reasons, in a troubling time like we are right now, with 3 wars running in the main, not only 3 wars, but in the main pages of newspapers, 3 wars are just being a huge chapter of this part of history, as we can understand this part as history. The Pope is saying, okay, I'm going to go with my message. I don't think the message is going to be quite revolutionary for the Catholic Church, but I think he's going to focus on hope mainly, because it's whatever a lot of communities which are suffering right now, and a lot of communities that can consider themselves completely a part of their respective societies are expecting to. So it's at some point, I think that he is going to give quite an importance to these communities, and quite an importance to these faiths. So because they deserve the visit of the Pope, and I think that is itself a very quite significant gesture.
And finally, what have people got to look forward to when you look at the schedule over the next 3 days? What are the key things that you think people ought to be looking out for?
Of course, are going to be whatever they say in Mass. That message is key for the Vatican, has always been key for the Vatican, because whatever you say to the people who goes to the cult, who goes to the Mass, and who goes to the rite, and who goes to celebrate the rite with along with the Pope, that message is going to be key. And I think that message is going to be stronger, and it's going to be more important that whatever the Pope can say in a brief press conference on his plane. So we have to keep lots of attention to the masses and to the message he's gonna deliver in the masses, because I think of course, because of his role as a pope, there is where the real thing is going to happen.
Mr. Casero, fascinating to hear your analysis. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the show tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, after the break, we'll be checking in with our correspondents around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime. The ceasefire between Washington and Tehran is already under strain, with Donald Trump accusing Iran of blocking oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. A-News's Ubay Sharbanda sent us this report.
President Trump is not happy that Iran appears to not be fully complying with the ceasefire terms, which require it to fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz to all commercial shipping. Trump accused Iran of violating the ceasefire agreement and not allowing oil shipments to cross the strait. Only a handful of vessels have crossed the Strait of Hormuz since the ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran came into effect. President Trump also posted on social media his concerns that Iran is attempting to charge massive fees to allow ships to cross the Strait of Hormuz. Trump said that Iran was being, quote, dishonorable, and that any attempts to coerce payment for ships to cross the strait must come to an immediate stop. New reports have emerged on how Iranian-backed proxies in the region have reportedly come close to ambushing American diplomats in neighboring Iraq. In a statement on Thursday, the U.S. State Department said that a group of U.S. diplomats were ambushed in Baghdad on Wednesday by Iranian-backed extremists. No casualties were reported. The ambush came after hundreds of similar attacks in recent weeks against American diplomatic facilities in the region, as well as an abduction of an American journalist in Iraq who has since been released but was previously held by Iraqi militants. The State Department called on the Iraqi government to take immediate steps to dismantle Iranian-backed militant proxies operating outside of the government control in Iraq. Ubi Shibander, A News, Washington.
Well, to Tehran now, and Iran is striking a defiant tone just days into this fragile ceasefire with the United States and Israel. Its leadership is signalling a shift in posture, raising fresh questions about what comes next. A News correspondent Tora Shirlilo filed this report today from Tehran.
It is the third day of the two-week ceasefire between Iran, US and Israel, and Supreme Leader Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei has declared a decisive victory in the war. He also stressed that there will be a new phase in Iran's control over a strategic waterway of the Strait of Hormuz in the wake of the conflict. He made this statement in a recorded televised message broadcast on state TV on Thursday to mark the 40th day of killing of his father and former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei by Israeli-US air raids on 28th of February. Saying that Iran is not seeking a war, the new Supreme Leader added that Tehran will not relinquish its rights, referring to the country's civilian nuclear program and ballistic missiles capability. Meantime, President Masoud Pezeshkian held phone contacts with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and French President Emmanuel Macron. According to official sources, Iranian chief executive discussed with them the latest post-war developments, including violations of the ceasefire by US and Israel, stressing that Tehran's conditions will prevail as the agenda of planned talks with Washington in Pakistan on Saturday. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai also said that negotiations to end the war is contingent on the US adherence to ceasefire commitments on all fronts, especially in Lebanon. Tura Shiralilu, Tehran, for A News.
Moving to Europe, and a deadly incident in the Channel is once again exposing the dangers of irregular crossings. Well, authorities say smuggling tactics are evolving. A News's Anita Sharma filed this report.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where a deadly incident in the Channel from France to Britain once again highlights the risks of irregular crossings and how smuggling networks are adapting. French authorities initially said a so-called taxi boat used by smugglers sunk off the northern coast. However, officials now say at least 4 people died after being swept away by strong currents while trying to board the inflatable dinghy. Local officials say a group of migrants waded into the water to reach the boat when things went wrong. The dinghy continued its journey toward the UK, while dozens of others were rescued in a major emergency response. The incident underscores a growing tactic used by traffickers, launching boats offshore to avoid police patrols, forcing people into the water to board, often in dangerous conditions. And there are signs the routes themselves are shifting. Smugglers are increasingly moving operations beyond northern France into Belgium as enforcement tightens along the French coast. Belgian police say at least 17 departures have already been recorded this year, a stark contrast from a maximum of 2 per year since 2021. Belgian police spokesperson Anne Burkert says these networks operate in fragments, moving migrants in stages and demanding repeated payments, often under coercion, with reports of threats and abuse.
Those smuggling organizations, those criminal organizations, they never take people from the country they were born in to the UK. It's always in bits and pieces, and those people are transported to one place and they have to pay extra to get another part of the transport. It's really all criminal organizations that work in little pieces. It's never an all-inclusive. It's very dangerous. There's people being threatened. There's people being abused, sexually abused. Those things are being filmed to put pressure on the families, to have them pay more money. It's a criminal world, and it's better not to get involved.
Officials warn the model is highly adaptable, with traffickers shifting routes and tactics to stay ahead of enforcement. Despite the shift, though, Belgium remains a small part of the picture, with around 41,500 crossings detected on the France-UK route last year, and more than 2,200 already in the first 2 months of this year. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Well, meanwhile, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is continuing his Gulf tour with high-level talks aimed at reinforcing the fragile ceasefire between the US and Iran. Our correspondent brings us more now.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has travelled to the United Arab Emirates on Thursday, the second stop of his Gulf tour after Saudi Arabia, as efforts continue to secure the US-Iran ceasefire. In Abu Dhabi, he held fresh talks with regional defence chiefs on reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The meeting, chaired by the UK's Chief of Defence Staff, Sir Richard Knighton, included defence representatives from the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, Iraq and Egypt. Starmer told those attending that the ceasefire between the United States and Iran was welcome, but warned it remains fragile and requires continued international effort to halt. He stressed that the UK had been pushing for de-escalation throughout the conflict. Some of those attending had participated in the virtual military planning meeting chaired by Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper on Tuesday for around 40 nations to discuss how the Strait of Hormuz could be kept open after fighting is over. The Prime Minister's visit has also taken him to Bahrain, where he met British forces and again stressed that there is still work to do to secure the ceasefire and protect global energy flows. Zina Farizadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Moving to Turkey now, where Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has met his Syrian counterpart in Ankara, warning that the fragile ceasefire in the region could be undermined by further escalation. Well, the talks focused on regional security, Syria's stability and ongoing diplomatic efforts. Here are the details.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met Syrian Foreign Minister Assad Hassan el-Shabaini in Ankara on Thursday. Speaking at a joint press conference, Fidan called on the international community to be ready to respond appropriately to what he described as potential Israeli acts of sabotage following the recently announced Iran-US ceasefire. He warned that Israel was expanding what he described as its genocide in Gaza to Lebanon, noting that deadly Israeli attacks were continuing there despite the declared ceasefire. Fidan said Ankara hoped to see the creation of a new regional security architecture, including normalization of ties between Iran and the Arab Gulf states. He also stressed Turkey's readiness to play an active role in the process and provide the necessary support. Addressing planned Iran-US talks in Islamabad, Fidan expressed hope that negotiations would be held in good faith and reach a successful conclusion. He said the talks were expected to cover the nuclear file, uranium enrichment, the Strait of Hormuz, and broader regional security issues. Fidan also warned that ongoing Israeli strikes in Lebanon, which have killed hundreds of people, mostly civilians, could complicate the talks in Islamabad. He said Syria should be shielded from the adverse effects of the broader regional crisis. Turkey, the top diplomat stressed, would continue supporting Syria's stabilization, reconstruction, and national reconciliation efforts. The Syrian foreign minister, for his part, said the proposed Four Seas project could turn Syria and Turkey into a key energy corridor. The initiative aims to connect the Mediterranean Sea, the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, and the Arabian Gulf through a network of roads, railways, and energy lines. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
And in Azerbaijan, bilateral roundtable discussions have begun in the city of Gabala with the participation of representatives of civil societies from Azerbaijan and Armenia as all parts of the Peace Bridge initiative. And Nigar Shirinova has more from Gabala.
An Armenian delegation has arrived in Azerbaijan as part of the Peace Bridge initiative in what is being seen as a practical step towards strengthening dialogue between the two sides. The visit comes as a 3-day bilateral roundtable has now officially begun here in Gabala, running from April 10th to 12th, where representatives of civil society from both Azerbaijan and Armenia are meeting face-to-face. Notably, the Armenian delegation crossed into the Azerbaijan by land, entering through the fully delimited and demarcated section of the border and completing all required border and passport procedures. The roundtable is being held with the framework of a broader bilateral peace agenda agreed upon during a trilateral summit which was in Washington on August 8th in 2025, with the participation of the leaders of Azerbaijan, Armenia and the also United States, signaling continued international backing for a dialogue. Discussions here in Gabala are expected to focus on the current state of normalization efforts and progress outcomes of Peace Bridge initiative in both countries and the broader regional situation. Sessions will also center on promoting peace at the societal level and building trust as the process moves into its next stage. This roundtable underscores the ongoing efforts to turn dialogue into a tangible progress in the peace process. That's all for now. Stay tuned to A News. For on-ground latest updates, Nigar Shirinova, A News, Gabala, Azerbaijan.
To Central Asia now, and Uzbekistan plans to list its national investment fund in Tashkent and London, opening a $2.4 billion portfolio to investors. Well, the move aims to attract foreign capital and deepen financial markets. Our correspondent Savil Rajapova from Tashkent has more.
Uzbekistan's National Investment Fund has announced plans to conduct an initial public offering of its shares, with placement expected in both Tashkent and London. The Ministry of Economy and Finance is considering the sale of ordinary shares on the Tashkent Stock Exchange, as well as global depository receipts on the London Stock Exchange. Officials say the IPO will consist of 2 tranches, including an offer of ordinary shares to institutional and retail investors, and a separate placement of global depository receipts for international investors. The securities will be sold by the Ministry of Economy and Finance, while the fund itself will not receive proceeds from the sale. The National Investment Fund's portfolio includes minority stakes in 13 major state-owned enterprises, with total assets valued at more than $2.4 billion. These include large companies in energy, aviation, telecommunications, and gas industries. Authorities say the planned IPO is expected to increase transparency, attract foreign investment, and support further development of the country's stock market. IPOs of a number of large companies, including Uzbekistan Airways, Ustelecom, and National Electric Networks, are also planned over the next 2 years. It is Savil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Kazakhstan and Armenia are stepping up efforts to deepen bilateral ties with a focus on trade, transport routes, and emerging technologies. The latest signals came during high-level talks in Yerevan. A News' correspondent Fariza Kalamazina reports now from Almaty.
Kazakhstan and Armenia plan to expand interstate cooperation. This was announced during the official visit of Kazakhstan's Foreign Minister Yermak Kusherbayev to Yerevan, where he held talks with Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. The two sides outlined the course toward deeper engagement spanning trade, logistics and high-tech sectors. According to the Kazakh side, the changing geopolitical landscape in the South Caucasus is opening up new economic opportunities for both countries. One of the key areas is the restoration of Kazakh grain exports to Armenia via a railway route passing through Russia, Azerbaijan and Georgia, a corridor that was effectively relaunched last year. Against this backdrop, Kazakhstan has reaffirmed its interest in long-term exports of agricultural products, including grain and meat. A solid economic foundation is already in place with more than 100 enterprises with Kazakh capital operating in Armenia and over 400 Armenian companies active in Kazakhstan. Bilateral trade turnover stood at $69.2 million in 2025. The talks also focused on forward-looking areas such as digitalization and artificial intelligence. One example is the launch of a branch of the Armenian Educational Center Tumo in Astana, which is now seen as a platform for joint initiatives in technology and education. Fariza Kalimurza, Almaty, A News.
Okay, let's look now to Afghanistan, where the country is holding fresh talks with a major international lender. Now, the meeting points to continued encouragement on development and financial support. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis reports now from Kabul.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs says the Deputy Minister of Finance and Administration, Dr. Mohammad Naeem, has met with Fujimoto Locke, the newly appointed president of the Asian Development Bank, for talks on expanding cooperation between the two sides. According to a statement from the ministry, the meeting focused on bilateral collaboration, as well as a number of related issues linked to ongoing assistance and development support for Afghanistan. Dr. Mohammad Naeem expressed appreciation for the bank's assistance and cooperation and said Afghanistan remains committed to working with aid organizations in ways that benefit the Afghan people. The Foreign Ministry statement adds that Fujimoto Locke shared information about the bank's activities and its current areas of engagement. Quoting the Asian Development Bank official, the ministry said the bank has reaffirmed its commitment to continuing sustainable cooperation with Afghanistan. The meeting is being seen as an indication that both sides are seeking to maintain engagement, with Afghan officials emphasizing development needs on the ground, while the Asian Development Bank signals that its support and coordination will continue. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
And finally, China is stepping up its diplomatic engagement with North Korea at a sensitive moment for the region. A high-level visit is signalling closer coordination between Beijing and Pyongyang. Here's more from Beijing.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited North Korea, where he held high-level talks with his counterpart Choi Soon-hui, as well as other senior officials, in a move aimed at deepening bilateral ties and reinforcing strategic coordination. During the meetings, both sides pledged to advance what they described as traditional friendship between Beijing and Pyongyang, with Wang stressing the need to consolidate the positive momentum in relations and expand cooperation across political, economic, and security domains. The visit comes at a time of heightened geopolitical shifts in Northeast Asia, including growing alignment between North Korea and Russia, ongoing tensions on the Korean Peninsula, and continued rivalry between China and the United States. Against this backdrop, analysts say that Beijing is seeking to ensure stability on its border while maintaining influence over Pyongyang's strategic direction. Wang also reiterated China's long-standing position on the Korean Peninsula issue, calling for dialogue and political settlement while opposing actions that could escalate tensions. For its part, North Korea expressed support for closer coordination with China on regional and international issues. The trip marks a significant diplomatic engagement between the two countries and highlights China's efforts to actively shape regional dynamics while positioning itself as a stabilizing force. Anu Mathim, A News, Beijing.
Well, that brings us to the end of Primetime for tonight, and indeed for this week. Please do join us again on a Monday, though, for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, have a great weekend.